Welcome to this episode of the Customer-Centric Retailing Podcast, a forum for retail leaders to discuss industry trends, challenges, and opportunities.
I'm Anil.
And I'm Fabi, and each episode we invite some of the brightest minds in the industry to discuss the future of customer centricity, with topics ranging from the rise of e-commerce to brick-and-mortar operations to omnichannel technology to retail culture and how all of these elements come together to create customer-centric retailing. Today we have with us Miya Knights, a director and publisher of retail technology news. Miya has nearly 20 years of experience as a journalist, editor, and research director, and she regularly appears on networks such as BBC and Sky News to comment on emerging retail trends and retail technology. Welcome to the podcast, Miya. It's a pleasure having you on, and I'm excited to jump right in and start picking your brain.
Thank you, Fabi. Thank you, Anil, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Let's get started.
All right. Well, before we jump in, you've had such an interesting career and you've been able to observe customer trends and the evolution of the retail industry, particularly during the rise of digital. Can you walk us through your career progression and what attracted you to the retail industry at a high level, just to start us off?
Absolutely. So I studied as English literature, which is a weird way into technology, but essentially I say that the best thing I was good at, my greatest talent was reading and writing throughout my formative years, and really wanted to be a writer. Went to university, went to Oxford to study English. Harry Potter became a massive character, and I thought, well, J.K. Rowling's got the sort of star author job all sewn up. I'd better go and get a day job. Looked to become a journalist from that. And ended up kind of falling into technology, but happily so, because it was a subject that I think when 20 odd years ago when I started, it was still is emerging, still is a little bit of a dark art in that sense, but it was one where everyone was learning at the same pace. So for me to come in and learn at the feet of some real experts in terms of the people that I was able to interview, the stories that I covered, the companies that I tracked, really gave me a head start through the seismic changes that we've seen in the last couple of decades. And I ended up writing about retail because I love to shop. So the intersection of where retail and technology meet is my sweet spot and has been for the last 20 or so years. Having been a journalist, edited Retail Technology magazine in the UK, which I now publish and edit. Having been customer experience analyst at IDC Retail Insights, and then global technology director at Planet Retails, now known as Edge. Took me into then sort of gamekeeper turned poacher, worked for a digital marketing company called Eagle Eye Solutions, which deals in loyalty, which is one of the sort of really hot areas at the moment, both online and in stores. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. But retail and technology has always been my passion throughout my career. I'm just glad I can be here to share the sum total of my experience with you.
Thank you for sharing that. And you obviously have accomplished your goal of writing and writing books. You've written quite a lot. You've co-written a book called Omnichannel Retail: How to Build Winning Stores in a Digital World, which focuses on the evolution of the physical shopping experience and really provides some tangible strategies for retailers to take advantage of a changing landscape. So the term omnichannel is almost overused in the retail industry at this point. And in our opinion, that's because we believe in many cases that it's misused. So almost every retailer out there calls themselves omnichannel by virtue of the fact that they have an online storefront as well as a brick and mortar presence, but there's just nothing connecting those two realms in reality. So it is really just a word that they use. So to start us off, we'd love to ask you what you think the term omnichannel means in today's modern retail environment and how retailers can actually embody that term.
Yes, I think it's a great question to kick us off with, because the term really divides people. Some people love it and some people hate it. I think the very fact that it has stuck around for as long as it has is testament to its continued relevance. I think that's actually a little bit of a shame because it points to the speed of and maturity of retailers' digital transformation efforts. The fact that it's still around, I think, is testament to the fact that they still have some way to go in terms of achieving its objectives. And as you rightly say, having an online storefront and a physical storefront that aren't in any way connected or integrated, both from a back end perspective as well as from a customer experience and a total proposition and total offering, sort of builds on the term omnichannel, is really just a multi-channel strategy, which is what we were talking about in the 90s,
Right.
when websites first became popular and we started to see transactional online shopping emerge as e-commerce as we know it today. As a writer, I always like to take a step back and look at what omnichannel actually means. The root omni, all, Latin, all or everything. I think it really refers to the fact that consumers don't see channels. They don't understand channels. They don't think in channels. They just see a retailer. I think there's an advantage if they see a retailer on the high street or the main street, as well as engaging with them digitally. To give you an example about how far back I go, I remember getting calls from IT directors in the early 2000s saying that they were getting calls from store managers complaining about customers trying to bring in online products that they wanted to return in store. And I think that's a really good anecdote for explaining or building on what I was trying to explain at the top of my answer, which is that it shows how far we have to go, but also how retailers have kind of always been slightly one step behind consumers as soon as digital became a capability that they needed to master. I think omnichannel has a lot to do with orchestrating processes across channels in such a way as it appears seamless to the consumer, but also is efficient, productive, and as profitable as possible across all channels for the retailer as well. Treating them discreetly is not profitable at the end of the day.
Yeah, Maya, this is interesting. I really, while you said a lot of good things. One thing that I really got me interested is that customer intuitively knew that they bought something online and they should be able to go in the store and be able to return or exchange it. But retailers were not even prepared for that. So I mean, like, omni-channel is so natural to the customer's expectations, or they could figure how this world should be working. And retail experts at retailing who are defining the buying experience for the customer, they are still trying to grasp it and see how they can really deliver on the customer's expectations there. That's interesting. Thanks.
Yes, absolutely, I agree.
Yeah, and something you said there too is customers don't see channels, and yet we still treat them discreetly and distinctly. And that's such a kind of a mistake that retailers make, and it's become more and more of a problem with the rise of digital because so many retailers are still stuck in their old world and their old way of doing things. And kind of speaking of buzzwords, another buzzword that we're hearing all the time nowadays is the term retail apocalypse. And it's just a really common one in the industry right now. It's pulled out more and more to explain the demise of primarily brick and mortar retailers that have been slow to adapt to digital trends and really adopt omnichannel as part of their strategy. So I'm curious, how do you believe that the role of brick and mortar stores must change to keep pace with shifting customer preferences and demand?
Yeah, again, a great question. And so the answer is no. It isn't a. There is. It hasn't been a retail apocalypse. I think if there has been any cause for alarm, it's certainly increased in the last year or so. But the pandemic is not the great irrefutable change in our world. It has only accelerated the great irrefutable change, which is digital. So those retailers that were laggards are really finding it tough. those retailers that were winning with digital, that were really ahead in their digital transformation strategies, or that were founded on digital, are running away with it. My Amazon co-author likes to say, has been saying recently, the pandemic has been a gift for Amazon. So I think that some retailers probably feel it is quite apocalyptic at the moment, but the writing has been on the wall for a long time. Is my point about being asked this question for the last 10 years? Is it the death of the high street, the death of the main street? And fast forward to today, I think what's happened is that a lot of the structural changes that retailers have needed to make because of the rise of digital have been either put off for too long, and so these retailers haven't survived, or have been forced upon retailers in terms of their speed to adapt in the last 8 to 10 months or so. But as I said, those that had already down that road on their digital transformation journey were better prepared to cope with the last 8 months. And I think the necessary pain has been to right size store estates, physical store estates, in line with their growing digital offer. Again, bit of color and context. Remember a large department store retail executive saying to me he couldn't believe that probably about 15 years ago, his online store had outsold his brick and mortar flagship store on Oxford Street on a weekend. And that's now, regularly happening. And of course, with stores closed, it's happening day in, day out now. But I think it's still exposed structural weaknesses, which is going back to your question about omnichannel, having those separate, discrete channels, operating them separately and discreetly, achieving integrations from a point-to-point perspective, not looking at the well-worn, well-proven technologies, sort of in terms of service-oriented architectures, API-based architectures, to make these systems run better together, to integrate them better together, to orchestrate them better. You are just running between channels, creating point-to-point integrations with sticky tape and brown paper, I like to call it. And those structural inefficiencies are what get exposed to the customer in terms of promise to deliver. So if you're saying, BOPIS, curbside, click and collect, and the product's not there, or you have to wait half an hour to get your product. I mean, last year I was speaking to a retailer who pointed out to me they didn't realize that their click and collect counters at lunchtime in high traffic urban areas were going to have queues as long as their cash desks. The cash desks were empty, but the click and collect queue took people their entire lunch hour to get to collect their item. I think that's where you're creating a customer experience in the store that could be enabled with digital, that has started online, that needs better integration, that needs better services up front for customers that are digitally enabled, and better orchestration and efficiencies and productivities in the back end to ensure that supply chain and the promise to deliver are met and optimized.
So Maya, it's interesting how you said that a lot of these new companies that we see, the new retailers or new digitally native companies that started with the online and now starting to open the stores, they have much less money and much less experience. Still, they are able to deliver the new experience to the customer. In fact, they are able to impress and retain the customers, attract and retain the customers. Versus the big companies, like all these big retailers, as from JCPenney or to Macy's or a lot of other companies, right? They have deep pockets. They have like so much of revenues, and they have so much money, and their name is so big they can even get more money. Still, even though they have billions and billions of dollars, they are not able to achieve what smaller, newer companies are able to do in such a short span of time with so little money. So why is this?
One quick one-word answer, Anna: legacy. I think legacy thinking, legacy technology, and also to that sort of structural point I made, commercial model related, legacy stores. The JC Penney's and the Sears, and in the UK where I live, you've got great examples like Marks and Spencer's, really struggling with overstored and underperforming physical estates. A lot of these retailers have, rightly or wrongly, taken advantage of the fact that COVID has closed a lot of these stores. And in the UK, for example, the department store John Lewis has said some of these stores aren't going to reopen. But I actually think that is, to Fabi's point about the retail apocalypse, the pain that they've been putting off for a long time. To your question, Anil, the balance of investment has been too heavily focused on the stores. Perhaps necessarily so, because labor is, one, your most valuable asset and also your most costly asset. And running stores is a really expensive and very, very highly specialized thing to do. Quick sidebar to that, I think Amazon's got a lot to learn about running stores, for example. So there is something to be said for that merchant curation skill, but it's really harnessing that skill digitally and bringing the digital connections that you can build that are so much richer with customers online into the store, to digitally augment the store so that those stores that are left are more impactful and actually give consumers a reason to go and visit. And when they do visit, if I'm registered with you online and I'm a regular loyal customer, recognize me when I get into the store and treat me better than a one-time anonymous cash paying customer. I think, direct to consumer brands, young startup brands, they have the agility and they're able to act in a much more nimble way than these larger retailers, but they're also setting these larger retailers a really great example. And hopefully they could, put into practice some of the suggestions I've made to match them and start to move at the same speed that they can.
I love how you really succinctly summarized the problem here with one word, which really is legacy. So I'd love to get your thoughts on, what role new and emerging retail technology will play in the modern store, and what are some of the main technologies in your view that forward-thinking retailers should adopt to enable those omni-channel experiences and really leave legacy behind?
I think legacy, again, to be the voice of pragmatism, hopefully, legacy has its place. I say very tentatively, in the sense that when I started out, I would talk to banks and retailers who were still using mainframe and are still using mainframe, and it has its place. I think there are some core systems that retailers can't afford possibly to rip and replace, like your ERP system, like your point of sale systems. The hardware that's attached to the point of sale systems mean that POS refresh cycles are 10 to 12 years long in some retailers, and longer. So I think the new and emerging technologies fall into two camps: those that allow you to move faster as far as the consumer is concerned, in terms of facilitating a seamless and infinite customer journey, in the sense that there's complexity of channels and touch points, and making sure that they get a consistent experience across all of them. And then there are those facilitating technologies in the back end that allow retailers to make the most of their legacy, but connect to the newest, latest, greatest endpoints in terms of those channels and touch points, but also core systems in terms of e-commerce, requirement systems that they require to optimize the supply chain. I mean, this was, again, going back sort of when I started at IDC, I felt the two key were order management systems and digital asset management systems. So these things can be kind of layered on top. The legacy thinking, though, that I've not seen really change over the years is when a retailer looks to re-platform, it's still looking to try, and I'm seeing the most activity around the e-commerce area at the moment, of course. I think it follows from what we've been saying that they are waking up to the fact that, if, as McKinsey said, 30% of US consumers have discovered shopping online for the first time in the last 8 to 10 months. That is your main shop window now. It's not your physical store at the moment. So I think, over the last sort of 18 months or so, I've been seeing a real uptick in e-commerce re-platforming. But again, they're kind of trying to boil the ocean with the platform, and they're says, does it have customer experience management? Does it have omnichannel order management systems? Does it have digital asset management? It might be that best of breed and best in class is a way to go instead of the modules that come baked into those larger systems. I think there needs to be, from a legacy thinking perspective, a separation of duties between the CMO and the CDO, and then the IT suite of the CTO, CIO, and CISO. The latter needs to take care of the governance. They need to make sure that the APIs are in place, the architecture is in place to do the orchestration, to be able to plug in these systems quickly so that marketing can spin up a TikTok campaign and then link it use the same assets for a Facebook campaign. But at the same time, the ops guys, the head of e-commerce and the head of store ops, need to talk to each other much better and have a better interface with CDO and CMO to get an idea of what's coming down the pipe in terms of customer engagement, so that the governance side of things is ready to handle demand, which is, I think, something we're all thinking about at this time of year around peak time. So there's lots there. That's kind of very boring plumbing stuff, but the customer experience stuff, which I mentioned up front and I'll sort of round up last, is the exciting stuff that retailers tend to see as shiny and grab onto and try and tap onto the front end without really thinking about the cascading processes and people changes, as well as the technology changes needed in the back end.
Yeah, Maya. Actually, I've also seen this come up a lot of times in my last few years, is that people are moving away from monolithic legacy systems towards more, smaller, best of the breed, and bringing those best of the breed system bring together and have them work to achieve a much better experience. Like you mentioned, OMS, CMS, and then similarly promotions and loyalty programs and many other systems. Also having these best of the breed system and building the capability in house, or with the help of any kind of additional help we can do, if they can build a governance model so that very quickly they can adopt a new technology, so that they can keep up with the change. That's amazing, actually, and I've seen a lot of retailers moving towards that. So that's good. And also you mentioned about like three roles: CMO, CDO, and CIO. And if I got it right, you said, like, CIO should be responsible for governance and all that, and CDO should be for all the forward thinking and delivering the experience, and CMO is the person who is driving all the requirements mostly. Is that right? Did I get it right?
Yes, you're absolutely right, Anna. I think too often I hear about good technologies that might move the dial quickly in a retailer being stymied because the CIO says, dare I say, I can build that in SharePoint if it's an internal system, or it might just be reference to SharePoint. It might just be a project management capability. But if it's built native, if you're looking at a best of breed system that's built natively for the web that you can spin up quickly for your store associates as well as your head office staff, as particularly now that we're all working remotely at the moment, the tools are there. The cloud is maturing at such a rate as to really offer some credible alternatives from an IT infrastructure perspective to allow the operational side of the business to execute at speed. And yes, the chief digital officer, marketing, store ops, head of ecom, all these guys, I think, need to be empowered to work, to move faster, to innovate quicker. And that empowerment comes from the job of the technology, information, and information security officers. Yeah.
Something that we keep coming back to is, yes, technology is so important and it really is the foundation for that customer experience. Without the necessary technology, it's just hard for you to enable the type of experiences that we're all talking about. But ultimately, if you don't have that buy-in internally, and if there's resistance internally, especially from the leadership, then it's going to be really, really difficult to achieve omnichannel as well. So I wanted to kind of delve into what you said earlier about legacy thinking, because this industry is constantly evolving, and yet we still see so many retail giants continue to be resistant to change and really set in their old ways. So why do you think that is? And what advice do you have for retail leaders that are really hesitant to innovate, particularly after this pandemic as well?
I think the reason why that is ironically because buying and selling stuff is probably one of the oldest professions in the world. Sometimes it's difficult to tell retailers how to do what they know how to do, and I've been lucky enough to witness that transition, and still there is tension and resistance over the last 25 years or so of the buyer telling the technology, supply chain, AI company that nobody knows my customers better than me. I know that that color blue is going to be popular just because I do, because it's always popular at this time of year. And whether or not the data backs it up, there's that tension, and it still does exist, to trust the technology. But then, continuing on a bit of a history lesson theme, that's thousands of years. Fast forward to sort of the last hundred or so years, I think what we would all agree has been missing in retail is that local store experience or local bank manager experience, where you would go into your local baker or convenience store and they would know you by name and they might have what you needed already put aside. And retailers have actually benefited hugely from automation that's come from technology. They've been able to scale global businesses, reverse the process, as it were, and try and expose more of the information that they use to run their business, not only to those that make the decisions higher up in the business, but also to us. So as an example, it would be, live stock checks by store, so that I can know if I actually want to go into a store because I need it now, I can, and it will be there on the shelf for me. There are so many different ways of kind of tackling your question in that sense. But hopefully I've kind of touched on it when I said, it's trusting the technology to give you that scale and operate at that scale through automation, but then trusting it that now that in terms of the scale, if you talk about the scale of our digital footprints as consumers, that's exploded even more exponentially. I think it goes back to that point we made earlier about, when it was one channel or multi-channels, retailers were kind of the ones in control because it was controllable. They had stores, and that was the main point of sale. Now their points of sale can be WhatsApp, it can be Instagram, it can be their own website, it can be a mobile app, it can be so many different things. You can make shoppable posters nowadays, so tracking all of that and making more of the information we share digitally as a result of all of that has, I think, taken that scale question, that scale challenge to a whole nother level, that they cannot trust more manually based processes and systems as they used to. They need to trust in the automation to and the analytics that we've developed over the last couple of decades to run the business with a little bit more autonomy. Only in that way can you achieve things like one-to-one personalization and engagement and the levels of orchestration that we've been talking about in terms of promise to deliver from any point, any touch point, from a customer perspective, to be able to deliver a product at the right time at the right place, or a promotion at the right time in the right place to the customer wherever they might want it to be. Requires a real shift in thinking, as well as the legacy technology.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you were saying earlier about the customer not seeing the channel, and we're really well past the point where we're operating one channel or two or even three. It's more than we can even count on one hand or two. And as you mentioned earlier, one of the main areas where legacy thinking really prevails is in the distinction between the online and offline worlds. And so many retailers are operating essentially two separate businesses. And many retail leaders that we've spoken to have said that there is a misalignment between their e-commerce and their brick and mortar teams, and that there's a competition between the two that really hinders business growth. And it also creates a worse and more disjointed customer experience as a whole as well. So I'm curious, what is your opinion on the ideal relationship between the online and offline retail worlds?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it builds really well from your legacy question. I think the most important thing when it comes to that legacy also are the measurements, the KPIs, the key performance indicators. A good way of cutting through that competition is to really rip up the rule book in terms of how you're measuring your performance. Measuring stores against the online and e-com discreetly is the most legacy way of thinking, I think, is out there.
Absolutely.
The most progressive ways of thinking, and I certainly can't lay claim to be an expert on it, but I'm hearing more about thinking about the store and its role in the shopping journey from a media standpoint. A simple fix that I know the department store John Lewis, for example, has had in place for quite a few years now, was just to group stores and online sales by postcode. So sales that occur in the within a geographic area radius of a particular store get assigned to that store, and presumably then if someone comes in to return something that they've bought 3 or 4 miles away and has been delivered to their home 3 or 4 miles away, the store manager is a little less aggrieved if that return comes off of his weekly sales quota. So there are ways of doing it just by, as you say, the way you're measuring things. But I think that's a very simplistic example, and the most complex example that I've seen at the moment has been the store as media. But the reason I see it as complex, and I'm certainly no expert on it, is because you really need to be able to measure the engagement at every touch point, and also weight the importance of that engagement against conversion to a sale. Interestingly, I think two last quick points. There's been some interesting research by the real estate researcher CACI that came out last year that shows a definite uplift in online sales if a store is opened within the geographic region of that location. And so retailers really have to get beyond the legacy thinking of one competing against the other. They are symbiotic. They are they do sustain each other. They are of mutual benefit to each other, the physical and the digital.
So I do want to, as we're wrapping up here, ask you a question about Amazon, because I know that this is a topic that you're very knowledgeable about, and you've written a book about as well. You've written extensively about the massive role that Amazon plays within the retail industry today. And as you know well, many retailers fear that they're going to be really squeezed out of the marketplace by an ever growing Amazon, particularly during this pandemic. So I'm really curious, what do you think are the main lessons that modern retailers can learn from Amazon? And how do you think that they can compete with the industry giant as well, or can they?
Uh, Dealing with your last question first, can they compete with Amazon? What they and in answering what they should learn, I think they shouldn't compare themselves directly to Amazon. The main premise of the book I co-authored was that Amazon is a technology company first and a retailer second. What retailers can learn from that, though, is the laser focused obsession on how to use technology to sell to consumers. And that's why they have been so successful over the last 25 years. Their CTO, Werner Vogels, famously said Jeff didn't start Amazon to open a bookshop. He started Amazon using books as the most predictable item that you can ship and that you can sell without actually having to pick up, as a way to find out what we wanted online. And what we have as a result today is the learnings that Amazon has gained from starting small with books and then expanding to everything. And I think the main point about what retailers need to learn is that there are some things as a result that Amazon is great at, and there are some things that Amazon can't do. We tried to coin the hashtag WACD, what Amazon can't do. And it goes back to earlier in our conversation when we were talking about those merchant curation skills. I think we would all agree Amazon's great, it's predictable, it's got high trust levels. It doesn't have a huge amount of brand affinity. It's got lots of brand loyalty, but not, doesn't make you feel warm and fuzzy and fluffy inside. It's not maybe the place that you would go for high fashion. It's not maybe the place you'd go if you wanted a highly consultative sale. It's not the place you would go if you know exactly what you want to buy, but you've got to search through 24,000 search results to find it. It's also not great for grocery in that sense. Being able to just put in pasta, and you're suddenly daunted by 40,000 search results. Whereas, if you shop with your major grocer online, you've probably got a much more curated experience with much better product descriptions, digital imagery, cross-selling and upselling from a promotional standpoint in terms of buy one, get one free. So there are some things that Amazon really hasn't quite yet cracked. And I think that comes down to, as we were saying earlier, harnessing those merchant curation skills. Being a technology company first and a retailer second means that, yes, you could be customer obsessed, but you can only be customer obsessed in the sense of the data that we share. And so it's a very data driven company. And I think that's what I mean by it being slightly impersonal. I think retailers have to learn those data smarts and learn how to really harness what they can know about us through that data to bring their merchant curation skills to bear in a much more impactful way, to make much more immersive experiences, much more engaging experiences, ones, as I said, that recognize me and reward me for my continued custom. And I don't think Amazon's cracked that yet. They might have Prime in terms of a proxy for loyalty, but I think if you are a specialist retailer, if you're really 100% focused on why your brand exists, what your brand purpose is, if you have those clear in your mind, and you use all the technology that we've discussed to bring that to bear to the customer experience, and you're laser focused as opposed to Amazon, which is the everything store and tries to be everything to everybody, I think you're more likely to be able to compete with Amazon. Don't try and compete with Amazon on every scale and every level. You'll never beat them, but pick your battles and remember the skills that you have that Amazon doesn't, which is to know your customer and to really flex that merchant curation legacy that really has stood retailers in good stead for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, I think what you said there is really interesting and important, specifically about not trying to compete with Amazon on everything. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about how Amazon really hasn't figured out stores yet, right? So that's an opportunity for retailers to take advantage of their store networks, take advantage of what they do best, and instead of really being so afraid of Amazon and being so reactive to everything that Amazon does, tapping into what makes them unique, focusing on the customer, and adopting the technologies that are necessary to be able to create that experience. I think we can leave it there, but I want to say thank you so much again for your time today, Maya. It was a pleasure speaking with you and picking your brain. Why don't we conclude by just telling the audience what's next for you and how they can keep up with you?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a great discussion. What's next for me? I'm actually updating Amazon, the book. The full title's a bit unwieldy, but I'll give it to you because looking for Amazon, searching for a book called Amazon is not easy. It's Amazon, How the World's Most Relentless Retailer Will Continue to Revolutionize Retail. Bit of a mouthful. That wasn't our choice as publisher's choice, but in its meaning, I think the concepts that we introduced and that I was able to talk you through just there have stood the test of time in terms of the pandemic, but also definitely need updating in the sense that Amazon was winning with digital before and is running away with it now. So that's going to be keeping me busy. And I would suggest people either follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter to keep up with all the other things that I'll be hopefully busy doing in the new year.
Fantastic. Well, I very much look forward to picking up my copy of the book. And we can leave it there. But again, a special thank you to our special guest for joining us today. And to our audience, follow Miya Knights on LinkedIn and Twitter to keep up with her amazing career.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. It was really fun talking to you and definitely learned a lot today. So sure, let's keep in touch.
Definitely, Anna and Fabi. We will, definitely. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Sure, thanks. Bye.
I think a topic that was so interesting to discuss with Maya was really this concept of legacy thinking and legacy technology. And something that she talked about and that we talk about all the time is how some of these big name retailers with really deep pockets are so hesitant to implement new technologies, even when there's proven ROI there. So I'm really curious, Anil, from your viewpoint, why that is, that keeps happening, and we keep inviting people on this podcast that keep saying the same thing, which is that retail leaders refuse to innovate, even though it's no longer the safe choice not to.
Yeah, that's interesting because and when I asked her this question again, and then she said term legacy, Anil, legacy. It's just legacy in terms of technology, but not only technology, but the mindset also. Like she said, retailers, they think that they've been doing this whole business of selling for thousands of years now. How come you, as a technology companies, come and tell me what I should be doing? They just don't trust the technology. Instead, they still trust what they've been doing traditionally, and so they trust their gut feeling more than data-driven approach. Um, and also, other than that, they are very, very in retail. Maybe it's because their margins are low. I don't know, but they are very conservative when it comes to technology. So unless something comes from a really big brand name, right? Uh, the retailers are not interested. They are scared maybe to adopt a new technologies. When reality is that they don't have to actually. They should not be scared. And there are many retailers who have actually stepped up and they have started modernizing themselves. And a really good approach is that I think what's called strangling approach, where you don't have to remove the whole thing. Instead, what you do is you take one best of the breed system, like for example, like Maya was saying, like the loyalty program system, or your content management system, or distributed order management system that we do with our clients. Like all these best of the breed systems, they can very easily hook into your existing system. Legacy systems like ERP or your point of sale. So new systems can integrate and provide you the capabilities to serve your customer better. Yeah, go ahead.
I completely agree with you there in terms of not having to do a rip and replace. And if you're working with a vendor that knows what they're doing, they can seamlessly integrate into what you already have. And I think something that she mentioned too that I thought was really interesting was how customers really walk into stores now having more tools at their disposal than the retailer does. And a store associate really has no idea if this is the first time that a customer has ever stepped into their store or even heard of their store, or if this is a really loyal customer that's been shopping here for 10 years. And going back to what she said about, however many years ago you had your local store and the store associate in that store knew you by name, knew where you live and what you like, and was really able to give you a really customized experience. And we're really losing that now. So, in your view, what are the tools that store associates really need and are the highest priority to be able to empower store associates to provide that customized experience so that we're really focusing on the customer first?
Yeah, that's true. So I think like you said, the back in the day when retailers were very local, they knew their community. Now today, when we are going for much larger retailers that are doing business in like a across the country in a bigger geographical region and all that, we can use technology to enhance the human capabilities. Uh, Back in the day, your retailer was serving like a 5,000 people community or 10,000 people community or even smaller. Today you are serving more, so you need more memory power, more processing in your mind. Like human capabilities are in certain ways they are limited, right? But by bringing in technology, we can enhance and we can make the same human more capable or capable of serving like a community of 250,000 people, many of them who show up at the store like once a year or maybe first time they're coming. But with the technology now, retailer can know about this customer even though they are coming in for first time. We have technology today that keeps track of customers life cycle, their buying journey, their buying habits, everything online. So when your customer comes in the store, if your associates have the right tools, they can very quickly know everything they need to know about the customer, so they can serve the customer uh, as if the same customer was coming, all the time, like traditional retailers were.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said there about empowering your store associates with the right tools, like a clienteling app that's
Hmm.
really able to give you information about, you pull up a profile like that and you can see what their browsing history was. You can see if they have anything saved in their cart. So all of that is really blending channels, which is something that we talked about with her a lot as well. Is customers don't see channels and yet we still do, and we treat them as two separate departments. And we also, or retailers tend to compensate store associates or stores very differently than they do the online. And there was a study that she brought up, which I know that we're both very familiar with, which is that when stores are introduced into a location, digital sales go up. There is absolutely a correlation, and so it really doesn't make sense to be crediting stores only for store sales and online only for digital sales. It just doesn't work that way. And I wanted to dig into a little bit more about what she said about measuring success and KPIs, because I know that you have some really strong thoughts about the best way to approach crediting store associates for sales in their region.
Yes, and when we talk to our customers or when we are talking to the retailer, our suggestions is always that, hey, much more simple version is like set up zones, your retail zones, and group all the stores within that zone as a one unit. And then all the customers in that zone, doesn't matter if they're buying online or in the store, they are all treated as like customers of this zone and not one-to-one or online only customers or in-store customers. By doing this, what you are doing is you are making your store associates advocate for your online as well. So when the customer comes in, your store associates are actually more interested in helping them to learn about your brand, about your product. And finally, it's possible that the customer learned everything about the product, but they may not buy it right now. So it's okay if they go home and buy it. Associate knows that they would get credited for it. The store manager knows that this is this online sale will be counted towards their annual targets. Finally, everybody has to pay bills. So the associates, the unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, but the performance of store and the associate is measured in certain way, which is the revenues. Now all we need to do is expand our horizon, and instead of revenue of the store, let's talk about revenue of a region. And I think that is much easier to achieve, and is definitely very effective way of rewarding your or tracking the performance of your associates or the stores.
Yeah, I think that's a very, what you're describing is a very new approach, and very few retailers have taken that on board. The two of us very rarely speak to retailers that approach it in that way. And so I think one of the main takeaways for me out of this conversation with Miya is it's really time for retailers to blur channels, to stop thinking so channel centric, because their customers certainly don't. And that's the reason that this is the title of our podcast, is because it's really time that retailers start putting the customer first and start centering not only their store operations around the customer, but their entire organization. And for a lot of retailers, that really means restructuring from within, so that it's customer focused as opposed to departmentalized. So I think that's a really good takeaway from this conversation with Miya.
That's it for this episode of the Customer Centric Retailing Podcast, featuring our special guest, Miya Knights. Miya is truly an expert when it comes to retail technology and strategy, the rise of Amazon, and the role of brick and mortar as this industry continues to evolve. Having observed the retail industry from within and above, Miya is convinced that retailers must learn from tech giants like Amazon in order to create a truly customer-centric experience that goes beyond channels and departments. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Please rate and review and recommend to a friend or fellow retail fanatic. This podcast is brought to you by Hot Wax Commerce.